Good afternoon, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here. It's my first time in Bangalore, so I've finally had a chance to see a bit of the city. As Pratima said, transport is a really critical issue both for environmental sustainability and also for ensuring equity in Indian cities. Transport is something that can facilitate people's livelihoods. It can provide opportunities for exciting encounters or experiences. And as Enrique Peñalosa was saying in the film just now, it's a way that people of all different socioeconomic strata can come together on equal footing in the same space. But it can also be a source of frustration and headaches if you don't know whether you're going to get your bus or if you have to schlep through the mud to get to a train station. So I think it's essential that we think carefully about transport and what it means to a vision of a livable city. So I'm going to first give an overview of what I think sustainable transport means, and then I'll go into one specific aspect that I've been dealing with in my work, which is how we design streets. So here are some topics that I would say are really essential for making our transport system sustainable. And then I'll go through all these in more detail. The first is public space. We need to think about transportation as more than just the utilitarian aspect, but also what we feel when we get into a street. We also need to look at cycling and walking, intermediate modes like auto rickshaws, and finally bus-based public transport. So now I'll talk about each of these a little bit. So if the city is a place where people want to spend time outside and go out into the street, then I think it'll be a lot easier for us to coax private vehicle users out of their cars, off of their bikes, and onto public transport and sustainable modes. But that means that it's essential that we create beautiful places, that we don't just think of a street as a means of mobility, but it's also a place to spend time, to meet your friends, and do things like that. And it needs to be safe. It needs to be a place where women feel comfortable. The next critical aspect is walking and cycling. So for me, having a sustainable transport system means that it's easy for me to walk. Trees, there are street trees, and not just in the heritage cores of our cities, but also throughout newly developing areas as well. There need to be footpaths that are continuous and unimpeded by encroachments like parked vehicles. And moving to cycling, we need to have, on our larger arterial streets, we need to have separate spaces for cyclists so that they can travel without having to fight with motor vehicles and large trucks. Next, the intermediate modes, so cycle rickshaws and auto rickshaws. These modes play a really essential role in the transport system of most Indian cities, but I don't think that we give them the respect that they deserve. So what often happens is that whenever a city is facing a trouble with congestion, these are the modes that are scapegoated. And they're blamed for slowing down traffic, when in fact the source of congestion is usually the rapidly growing numbers of private vehicles, and especially cars. The intermediate modes provide affordable transport for people who can't afford their own vehicles, and they also have a really small environmental footprint. So I think it's essential that rather than trying to ban or restrict or otherwise constrain the use of intermediate modes, that we really promote them, and we put time and effort into managing them so that they can be a good component of the overall transport system. Finally, I think for most Indian cities, sustainable transport is going to mean a vast expansion of high-quality bus-based transport. And I say bus-based because this is the only way that most cities are going to be able to expand their public transport network fast enough to deal with the rising mobility needs that we have. And so bus rapid transit is a really critical element of this mix, and it means having high-quality service with good frequencies, stations where you're protected from the elements, level boarding like you can see in this picture from Ahmedabad, where the station and the bus platform are at the same level. So, so these are all the elements that I think we need to consider when we're looking at public transport, or looking at sustainable transport. So now I'll shift to street design, which is what I've been dealing with for the past year or so. I think the main obstacle here to sustainable transport is that we usually think of street design in terms of motor vehicles, and specifically private vehicles. So the general approach is to design a street from the center line out. So first we make sure that there are adequate travel lanes for the private vehicles. We might provide very generous parking space, as in this example. And then if you're lucky, if there's a little bit of space left over, then that becomes the footpath. And if you're unlucky, then you may get something like this, where it's downright dangerous to walk on the street. And my concern about this is that even if we don't provide space for the pedestrians, that doesn't mean that the pedestrians are going to disappear. They'll still be there on the street, trying to make do somehow. And usually this boils down to pedestrians on the carriageway. And so this is not good for the pedestrian. It's probably not safe. And it's inconvenient for the motor vehicle users too. So everyone is losing out in this scenario. And so I think we need to rethink that approach. I'll just go back to this. We need to look at all of the users on the street, all of the activities. There are pedestrians, there are street vending activities, there are people just meeting up. All of that needs to become part of the criteria for design, not just the private vehicle users. So I think the shared space approach that you find on most Indian streets is really good in the case of small streets. So here the vehicle speeds are low. There are different forms of traffic calming, either formal or informal. And so it works for people to be sharing the same space with the vehicles. And so even if a vehicle enters, it's sort of on equal footing with the pedestrians. It has to slow down, it has to make its way through cautiously. So here I think we're doing all right. Where it breaks down is on large streets where we have fast-moving vehicles and heavy vehicles. And so here I don't think it works as well for pedestrians and vehicles to be using the same space. And it's also true if you have a lot of heavy vehicles, if there are cyclists and so on. So in these cases, I think it's really important to start thinking about some sort of segregation. So here's one sketch just to illustrate how we think about these streets differently. And the key is that all streets need to have a slow zone. Okay? So on small streets on the left here, we're doing fine because pedestrians are using this shared space and vehicles can come in, but at reasonable speeds. And so this works pretty well. When we have larger streets that have a more important mobility function, then it makes sense to start providing different zones. And so on the example on the right, we've put in a footpath, a service lane that can also be used by pedestrians. And so it's recognizing that the street is providing different functions and they're not all compatible with each other in the same space. And even within the mobility portion of the street, there we're differentiating the space. So we're giving priority to public transport by giving bus lanes, and we're giving a separate space for cyclists so that they have better comfort and safety. So looking at how, I'll just go into this slow space and how we deal with that. One alternative is it can be a pedestrian-only space where vehicles don't enter, and so this is just an area for people to walk. It's a perfectly safe space. Another alternative is for it to be a shared zone. So in this example from Ahmedabad, vehicles are coming into this shared lane to access parking to get into properties. But by and large, it's a pedestrian space. And so people feel comfortable walking here. They're not constantly harassed by vehicles. And it's designed with good materials and textures so that it works for pedestrians. So recognizing the different uses of streets is a really critical element for sustainable transport. Because it allows us to tailor our designs to the activities that are actually happening, rather than just using a single blueprint everywhere in our cities. And to say a few words about how at ITDP we're trying to move this street design agenda forward. One big concern that we've had is that there's a lot of confusion about how to implement standards for implement facilities for non-motorized transport users. So there may be buy-in that this is something that we need, that we should be doing for something for pedestrians, but there's not clarity on how to do it. So we've been working on a manual for street design in Indian cities. And in this manual, we give some templates and examples of how you can weigh the different needs for and competing uses for street space, and how they can be coordinated to provide a street design that works for everyone. And then the next thing that we're doing is trying to facilitate the implementation of best practice. And so we're working in the cities of Surat, Pune, and Chennai to try to implement high-quality non-motorized transport facilities. And the hope is that these can become examples for other parts of those cities, but also for city officials from different cities to come and look at them, so that we can start to scale up this work. That's all I have, so thanks a lot for your attention. I look forward to questions.